Okay. Happy Sabbath, everyone. Today is July 17, 2021. And I thought this week I was going to finish with the book of Nehemiah, with Nehemiah's restoration of the temple. Not the temple. Nehemiah's restoration of the walls and the gates, right? Yeah. We studied the gates were a symbol of the 12 tribes. And the 12 tribes will be all joined together, right? We studied about that, and now we're going to continue about the reformation that Nehemiah had for for his countrymen, for those who are living in Jerusalem and the tribe of Judah. All right, so YouTube is on. All right, so we'll continue here, and okay, let me get to the slide. All right, the slide is here. Okay, remember they were in the process of when we were studying last time. They were in the process of rebuilding the walls and the gates, but they had so many enemies. Foremost is the threefold enemy of who? Sanballat. And Sanballat is from what? Sanballat is from where?
Ammonites?
No, Sanballat is actually a... Oh, let me see. I gotta share this.
Moabites.
It's a Moabite, yeah.
Moabites.
Right, okay. Right, now you see this, right? Sanballat is a Moabite, and then Tobiah is what kind of?
Ammonite.
Ammonite. And Gershon is what?
Arabian.
Is an Arabian, okay? So that's the threefold enemies of Nehemiah, the foremost. Obviously there's a lot more enemies, but the foremost of those, the threefold enemies, all right? So we're studying about that. And because of that, they all had to be watching and praying at the same time, right? They had to 24/7. They had to take shifts, watching for the enemies, and they also with one hand rebuilding the temple. With the other hand, they carried a weapon, right? And that's what they had to do in that time until they eventually finished, right? And they finished it in 52 days, all right? In 52 days. Okay, right? So we'll continue. We'll go to Nehemiah 5 here. During that time, while they're in the process of restoration, remember, this restoration is not finished yet, right? The temple, the walls and the gates are not dedicated yet. They have to still continue to rebuild. During that time, we read in Nehemiah 5. There was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren, the Jews. Wow. For there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, and that we may eat and live. Some also that were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses, that we might buy corn, because of the dearth. Oh boy, we are running out of corn. So what do we do? We don't have any more money. And because of that, because we don't have any money, what do we have to do? We have to mortgage our lands. We have to sell our lands. We have to sell our vineyards, and we have to sell our houses to buy corn. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute. Right? The king has to put a tribute on all the people, right? Artaxerxes, right? Put a tribute, and they have to pay it. And because they cannot pay it, they have to pay with their lands and their vineyards, right? Yet now our flesh, as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants. Now what happens? We have to become servants. We run out of money, we run out of land, we run out of houses, And then what happens? We have to be servants. And some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither of it is in our power to redeem them. For other men have our lands and vineyards. And I was very angry when I heard their cry and these words. Okay. Does this remind you of a story somewhere in the Bible where there's no more money, they had to sell their land, and then eventually they have to become servants? Do you remember a story like that somewhere in the Bible?
Joseph.
Yeah. We studied that. Right? That's Genesis 47. This story is, wow. This story is parallel to that story, right? When the poor and oppressed had appealed to Nehemiah for redress of their wrongs, he had stood boldly in their defense and had caused the wrongdoers to remove the reproach that rested on them. But the authority that he had exercised in behalf of his downtrodden countrymen, he did not now exercise in his own behalf. His efforts had been met by some with ingratitude and treachery, but he did not use his power to bring the traitors to punishment. Calmly and unselfishly, he went forward in his service for the people, never slackening his efforts or allowing his interest to grow less. So he continued to work, right? But he had to deal with all these problems. And even those who were, taking advantage of the people who were poor, taking their money, taking their land, and even making their brethren, turning their brethren into slaves, right? And this story is very similar to the story of Joseph in Genesis 47, right? Joseph had become kind of the prime minister, right? He's become the prime minister. He became the second in the land of Egypt, right? And then he gathered up the corn, right, for the 7 years of plenty, and he saved it up so that when the 7 years of drought came, the people can now buy corn from the king, right? So during the first year, they used up all their money to buy what? To buy all the corn for what they needed. And what happened? The money failed, ran out. Money is no use, all right? It now fails because now it's all used up, right? Money fails. And then so because of that, now what they have to do? They have to bring their cattle to use it to buy food, right? And when they run out of cattle, what do they have to do? They have to use their land, right? They have to give their land to Joseph and Pharaoh for corn. And then eventually what? They have to sell themselves to become servants to Pharaoh, right? It's the same thing. The same thing that happened to Nehemiah. Here's another, we used to think there was only one story like that in the Bible. Now we have two stories. The time of Joseph and the time of Nehemiah. Remember? This was still during the building of the walls and the gates, right? So for Joseph here, Joseph gathered all the money and the money failed. He gathered all the cattle, he gathered all the land, and everybody became slaves. And what happened? And he removed everybody to the cities. Nobody can live in the country anymore. They had to live in the cities except for the Hebrews and the priests because they own their own land. They still own their land, right? Everybody had to be moved to the cities. And then he made a law that 20% of all that was planted belonged to Pharaoh, right? The cattle belonged to Pharaoh. The land belonged to Pharaoh. The people belonged to Pharaoh. They became slaves. And all their work now belonged to Pharaoh. 20% of their work now belonged to the Pharaoh. The point is that we always get out of this story It's that what? When does money fail? Does the money fail before the decree or after the decree? Money fails before the decree, right? Yeah. Money fails before the decree. Money fails for in the time of Nehemiah, where they had to sell everything before the finishing of the walls and the gates, right? Yeah. We used to always think, oh boy, money will fail, right? When will money fail? Oh, money will fail after the Sunday law. No. So what we have to do is just wait until the Sunday law and then cash in all our money, all our investments. No, money fails before the Sunday law. Okay, these are some quotations that we all are familiar with, right? Yeah. Time is short. Hoarded wealth will soon be worthless. When the decree shall go forth that none shall buy or sell except they have the mark of the beast, very much means will be of no avail. Yeah? But remember, money fails before the decree. Right? Your wealth will be worthless. The time is coming when we cannot sell at any price. The decree will soon go forth, prohibiting many men to buy or sell, or any man save them that hath the mark of the beast. During the time of Ellen White, we came near having this realized in California a short time since. But this was only the threatening of the blowing of the four winds. So when the four winds starts to blow, right, that is already when money has failed already, right? And money will fail before the blowing of the four winds. As yet, they are held by the four angels. We are not just ready, because we are not ready. It says, hold, 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 because my people are not ready, right? In the last great conflict of the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see, and we quote this all the time, right? Every earthly support cut off, right? Money will fail. We cannot sell at any price, right? Because they refuse to break his law in obedience to earthly powers. They will be forbidden to buy and sell. Satan says, for fear of wanting food and clothing, they will join with the world in transgressing God's law, right? Yeah. For the fear of wanting food and clothing, right? Remember, every earthly support will be cut off. Those who are not ready, what will happen to them? They will have to live in the cities, right? Right? And in the cities, that's where they have to sell everything and they become slaves to Pharaoh, right? All right. So, we continue. Well, this is the story of Nehemiah. It continues on. And then the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the water gate. So now the people all gathered to the water gate. Now remember, the water gate is on the east side, right? It's on the east side, right? And they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded to Israel, right? So Ezra the scribe, remember Ezra? Ezra had come out of Babylon when? 20 years ago, not 20, 13 years ago. In the 7th year of Artaxerxes, right? 457, right? They are now in the what year? What year of Artaxerxes are they now? The 20th year, right? It's been 13 years. Ezra, according to Ellen White, is already old, right? But he was obviously revered, and he was told to bring out the book of the law of Moses. And Ezra the priest, he's a priest, remember? He was a priest, because he's the one that had to call the Levites. The priest called the Levites out to come out of Babylon, right? And Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation, both men and women, and all that could hear with understanding upon the first day of the 7th month. Okay, what's the first day of the 7th month? what feast is on the first day of the 7th month? Which feast? Anybody remember?
Day of Atonement.
No, Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month. What's the first day of the 7th month? Which feast is that? The Feast of Trumpets, right? It's the Feast of Trumpets, all right? And he read therein before the street that was before the water gate from the morning until midday. Wow, he was reading from morning until midday. Before the men and women, and those that could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive unto the book of the law, right? And here, it is told specifically for those who can understand. Because the problem is that there's a lot of those that did not understand, right? And Ezra the scribe stood upon the pulpit of wood which had made for the purpose. And beside him stood like 13 other men, right? And these were all priests. And Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, and he was above all the people. And when he opened it, all the people stood up. And Ezra blessed the Lord, the great God. And all the people answered, Amen, Amen, with lifting up their hands. And they bowed their heads and worshipped the Lord with their faces to the ground. And Jeshua, Bani, Sherebiah, Jachim, the Levites caused the people to understand the law. The problem is that they did not understand. Why did they not understand? Why do you think the people did not understand when the book of the law was being read? Why do you think the people? And the Levites had to make them understand. Why do you think they did not understand? Oh yeah, the other thing? The other thing is that they forgot their language. They don't even speak Hebrew. Yeah, they no longer spoke Hebrew. So when the Hebrew, the law of Moses had to be read to them in Hebrew, and they don't even understand Hebrew. So the priest and the Levites had to translate and teach them, right? And it started on the first day of the 7th month, which is the Feast of Trumpets, right? So they read in the book, in the law of God distinctly, and gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading so that now they can understand, right? Okay, here, Ellen White gives a commentary on this. Yet even here was the evidence of the sin of Israel. Through the intermarriage of the people with other nations, the Hebrew language had been corrupted, and great care was necessary on the part of the speakers to explain the law in the language of the people, that it might be understood by all. They already forgot Hebrew, right? It's already been corrupted. They don't understand the law anymore because it's, they've been a long time in Babylon, right? For several generations they've been in Babylon, right? Certain of the priests and the Levites united with Ezra in explaining the principles of the law. They read in the book in the law of God distinctly and gave the sense and caused them to understand the reading. Okay, do you see this? What's going to happen in the end time? Who is going to teach the people who don't understand the law of God, who do not speak Hebrew, who cannot read the Bible, who do not understand the Bible in the end time? Who are going to teach them? The priests and the Levites. So who are these people that do not understand the law and do not speak Hebrew? Who are these people that have to be taught by the priests and the Levites? Who are they? Well, obviously during the time of Nethinim, but who do they represent in the end time? The Nethinims, right? It's the Nethinims. The Nethinims have to be taught by the priests and the Levites. These are the people that do not understand, the book of Moses, the law of Moses. They don't speak Hebrew. They don't understand the Bible as they were supposed to, right? Okay, right. And on the second day were gathered together the chief of the fathers of all the people, the priests and the Levites, unto Ezra the scribe, even to understand the words of the law. And they found written in the law which the Lord had commanded by Moses, and the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month. Okay. So they were reading in the book of Moses about the feasts. They understood, okay, you know what? They were studying, okay, there are feasts. On the first day of the 7th month is the Feast of Trumpets. They also read in that book about that they had to dwell in booths in the Feast of the 7th month. All right? Okay. This is the Feast of Tabernacle. What days is the Feast of Tabernacles? Day of Atonement is the 10th day of the 7th month. When's the Feast of Tabernacles? It's from the 15th to the 22nd of the 7th month, right? They had to learn about the feasts. And then they should publish and proclaim in all their cities and Jerusalem, saying, go forth unto the mount and fetch, right? Fetch all these trees and make booths, as it is written. So the people went forth and brought them and made themselves booths, everyone upon the roof of his house. And they made booths in their courts, in the courts of the house, in the courts of the house of God, and in the street of the water gate, and in the street of the gate of Ephraim, right? From the water gate, which is on the east, and also the gate of Ephraim, that's on the west, right? The gate, the water gate is on the east, and the gate of Ephraim on the west. Specifically, now you see Watergate. Watergate, we were studying, represents the indwelling of the Holy Spirit in them, right? And the gate of Ephraim remains the Gentiles that are coming in, right? The gate of Ephraim. So here, the people who do not understand the law and the feasts and the history of the Jews, of the history of the Hebrews, had to be taught these things. Right? And all the congregation of them that were come out again out of the captivity made booths and sat under booths. Right? For since the day of Joshua the son of Nun. Who's Joshua the son of Nun? Who's Joshua the son of Nun? It's Joshua. Joshua, the leader of the Israelites as they came out of Egypt and went into Canaan. From the time of Joshua, they have not been keeping the Feast of Tabernacles. All the way until, what? The time of Nehemiah. Can you imagine that? The Feast of the Tabernacles were not kept during the time of Samuel. It was not kept during the time of Saul, David, or Solomon, or even all the kings, even until the time of Zedekiah, until they had to all go to Babylon. Only after they came back from Babylon, during the time of Nehemiah, were these feasts reformed, and they kept the feasts again, right? Imagine it. So the Feast of Tabernacle was not kept for a long time until the time of Nehemiah. Even from the time that they came out of Egypt to Canaan was the last time they kept the Feast of Tabernacles. And then it was restored again. This is why Nehemiah had to give a reformation. A reformation had to be made during the time of the building of the walls and the gates, right? On the following day, the reading and explaining of the law were continued. And at the time appointed, on the 10th day of the 7th month, the solemn services of the Day of Atonement were performed. Okay, so they had to keep the Feast of Trumpets. They had to keep the Day of Atonement, which is the Day of Atonement is what day?
First day,
10th day of the 7th month. The Feast of Trumpets is the first day of the 7th month, right? And from the 15th to the 22nd of the same month, the people and the ruler kept once more the Feast of Tabernacles. My question is, which book of Moses were they reading from morning until midday? Where is the book of Moses where does the book of Moses tell them how to keep the feasts? It's in Leviticus, absolutely. Leviticus 23, right? Okay, when you go to Leviticus, you can open your Bible. Leviticus 23, right? There Moses says, okay, you have to keep the feasts. And which feast was the first one? Okay, this is almost like a trick question. Which one was mentioned first as the one that you have to keep? The Sabbath. Oh, wow. Right? In verse 3, right there. The Sabbath is the first one, right? And then Passover, verse 4 to 8. And then first fruits, 9 to 14. And then the Feast of Weeks. That's Pentecost, verse 15 to 22. And then the trumpets, 23 to 25. And then Day of Atonement, 26 to 32. And then the Feast of Booths, 33 to 44. Remember, Ezra was reading all of this. And the people had to be taught this, as they already forgot. They even forgot their own language. They had to be taught all of this. And the ones that were teaching to them were the priests and the Levites, right? They had to teach them all the feasts. And it was during the Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and the Feast of Tabernacles. They had to keep all of that. All right? Okay. All right. There's got to be some meaning about this for us, There has to be some meaning. So the goal of us studying like this right now is to see how does this apply for us, right? How does this apply to us, right? Okay, we go to Nehemiah 9. Now in the 24th day of this month, right? In the 7th month, the 24th day of the month. Remember, the Feast of Tabernacle is from what day? The 15th to the 22nd. Now it is 2 days later, on the 24th day of this month, of the 7th month, the children of Israel were assembled with fasting and with sackcloth and earth upon them. And the seed of Israel separated themselves from all strangers. They had to separate from themselves. And stood and confessed their sins and iniquities of their fathers. And they stood up in their place and read in the book of the law of the Lord their God 1/4 part of the day, and another 4th part they confessed and worshiped the Lord their God. So they had to separate from strangers, right? Okay, let's read what Ellen White wrote. As they listened from day to day the words of the law, remember they were, it was in Leviticus, right? Leviticus 23. The people had been convicted of their transgressions and of the sins of their nation in past generations. They saw that it was because of a departure from God that his protecting care had been withdrawn, and that the children of Abraham had been scattered in foreign lands. Right? What were they reading now? Because of their sins of their fathers, they now had to be scattered in foreign lands. Okay, my question is, what book of the law of Moses were they reading? What chapter now? Remember, they were reading Leviticus 23. Now, what were they reading now? They were being scattered for the sins. What were they reading? Deuteronomy also, but they were reading Leviticus 25 and 24 and 25, right? Sorry, 25 and 26. What is Leviticus 25 and 26? If you don't obey the law and the commandments and all these statutes, I will scatter you among the nations, right? And I will punish you 7 times, right? Yeah. And this is also seen in the book of Deuteronomy, right? It's also in Deuteronomy, but the main thing is it's in. So they were reading Leviticus 23, and then here Ellen White basically said they were reading Leviticus 25 and 26. They were reading about the 7 times, right? And then when they read all that, they decided, oh boy, we have to separate from all strangers, from all their strange wives, remember? During the time of Ezra, they also had to divorce their strange wives. Here, they have to separate themselves from all strangers, right? Yeah. They determined to seek His mercy and to pledge themselves to walk in His commandments. Before entering upon this solemn service held on the second day after the close of the Feast of Tabernacles, they separated themselves from the heathen among them. Right? Okay. And we continue. Right? So they said they had to study about the 7 times and why they had to be scattered to Babylon. You know? A lot of them don't understand anymore. Why? Why did they have to be scattered 70 years? Why can they now be gathered after being scattered? Right? Yeah. All these things they have to understand. Okay. Nehemiah 9 verse 36 to 38. Behold, we are servants this day, and for the land that thou gavest unto our fathers to eat the fruit thereof and the good thereof, behold, we are servants in it. And it yielded much increase into the kings whom thou hast set over us because of our sins. Also, they have dominion over our bodies and over our cattle, and at their pleasure we are in great distress. And because all of this, we make a sure covenant and write it, and our princes and Levites and priests seal unto it. Right? This is Nehemiah 9 verse 36 to 38. But you read Nehemiah 9 verse 4 to 35. Look at verse 4 to 35. What were the Levites reciting to the children of Judah? Right? What was the Levites reciting to them?
Deuteronomy.
From Nehemiah 9 verses 4 to 35.
They're reciting Deuteronomy 24, 25.
No. Right? If you open the Bible and you read it, open the Bible. The Levites were reciting the history of the Hebrews, all the way from Abraham to the captivity in Egypt, to the Exodus, to the giving of the law in Sinai, to the molten calf apostasy, the 40 years wandering in the desert. They already forgot all of this stuff. The Levites, the priests and the Levites, they had to teach these people the history of the Hebrews, right? All the way from Abraham. Wow, they already forgot all of this. They don't know why they had to go to Babylon. They already forgot the history of the Hebrews from the time of Abraham to the time of Joseph. 40 years wandering in the desert, the conquering of Canaan, and their apostasy again, and not hearing the words of the prophets, and their kings, their princes, their priests, and their fathers who do not keep the law, and causing them to be scattered into Babylon, right? They forgot all about this. They did not understand Hebrew. They had to be taught how to keep the Sabbath. They had to be retaught how to, keep the feasts. They had to be taught about the 7 times principle. They had to be taught about the history of the Hebrews, right? And what they did to prove that they now heard it and want to keep the law of God, they made a covenant and they wrote it down and they put a seal upon it. So they made sure that they understand it so that they can be held accountable if they break it, right? They had to be taught about the Sabbath, right? Because remember, Nehemiah had to make a reformation about the Sabbath, right? Yeah. But they had to make sure, Nehemiah had to make sure that they understood about the Sabbath as well. And they made a covenant that they want to keep the Sabbath, the feasts, understand the 7 times, understand the history of the Hebrews, right? And all that. And they wrote it down and sealed it. All right. Then the whole congregation entered into a covenant to keep all the commandments of God. They had suffered punishment for their sins, Now they acknowledge the justice of God's dealing with them and pledge themselves to obey His law. And that this might be a sure covenant, right? A sure covenant right there. And be preserved in permanent form as a memorial of the obligation had taken upon themselves. It was written out, and the priests, Levites, and the princes signed it. It was to serve as a reminder of the duty and a barrier against temptation. The people took a solemn oath to walk in God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe and do all the commandments of the Lord our Lord, and His judgments and His statutes. The oath taken at this time included a promise not to intermarry with the people of the land. Right? Wow. Okay. Because of what happened? Because, remember Tobiah? What did Tobiah do? He married the daughter of the priest. Right? Remember Tobiah? Yeah. And his son married, his whole family married into the family of the Hebrews, even the priests, right? Right. Well, for the Judas, for the people who were rebuilding the wall, what did they do? They intermarried. They intermarried into the family of Tobiah. Can you imagine that? And they had to make an oath at this time that included a promise not to intermarry with the people of the land. Right? Yeah, the people of that land, right? The people that were in that land were what? It was Tobiah, all right? Sanballat. They were all the heathen that were living in that land. Yeah, right. And Gershon, right? All these people, the Samaritans that were living there, right? The people of Judah were not to marry them, right? Because they have done so. They have done so. Yeah? Tobiah's family had intermarried into the leaders of the nations. Right? Okay. Now we know that we eventually come to the point that the wall is finished. The gates are finished. And then it's time for the dedication. Right? The dedication is in Nehemiah 12. Right? I just picked a few verses here. And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites out of all their places to bring them to Jerusalem, to keep the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgivings and with singing, with cymbals, psalteries, and with harps. When I brought up the princes of Judah upon the wall and appointed 2 great companies of them that gave thanks, whereupon one went on the right hand upon the wall toward the dung gate. Okay, the dung gate is on the south, all the way to the bottom of the south, right? And the other company of them gave thanks, went over against them, and after them and the half of the people upon the wall, from beyond the tower of the furnaces on the west side unto the broad wall, and from the gate of Ephraim, the old gate, fish gate, tower of Hananel, the tower of Mia, upon the sheep gate, and into the prison gate. So one went on the west side, and it says that the other went on the other side, right? So stood the 2 companies of them that gave thanks to the house of God, and I and the half of the rulers with them. So they dedicated the walls and the gates, right? So now that they finished the walls and the gate, they finished it all right? Now the thing, Nehemiah 13, after that, what did they do? They continued to read. And on that day they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever. They read in the book, right? Which book was it that they were reading that in the book of Moses says that the Moabite, the Ammonite, I should have made a slide, I should have made I shouldn't have given this already, but it's in the book of Deuteronomy, right? That the Ammonite and the Moabite should not come into the congregation of God forever, because they met not the children of Israel with bread and with water, right? Yeah. The Ammonite and the Moabite did not give the children of Israel, as they were coming out of the land of Egypt, they did not give them water or food, right? They let them are ready to starve and go with thirst in the desert, right? But they hired Balaam against them, that he should curse them. Howbeit our God turned the curse into a blessing. Now it came to pass when they heard this law, that they separated from Israel all the mixed multitude, right? So no more, they had to separate themselves, because what they read, okay, the Moabites and the Ammonites. Who's a Moabite during that time? Who's the enemy that's a Moabite? Sanballat. Who's the Ammonite? Tobiah, right? During that time, right? It was Sanballat and Tobiah. It was their enemies. These people are not to join with us. They are not to have part in the rebuilding of the wall. We have to separate ourselves from them. Even Tobiah's family, who had intermarried into our into our families, had to be separated, right? Okay, if you read in Deuteronomy, an Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord, even to the what generation? Till the 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation forever, because they met you not with bread and water in the way when you came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam the son of Beor of Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse thee. Nevertheless, the Lord thy God would not hearken unto Balaam, but the Lord thy God turned the curse into a blessing unto thee, because the Lord thy God loved thee. Okay, right? The Moabite and the Ammonite. Who are the Moabites and the Ammonites? I shouldn't have put this here, but who are the Moabites and the Ammonites? Who is Moab? It's the that's that. It's the son of the elder daughter of Lot. And Ammon is also the son of the other daughter, right? Right. They're both the daughter. Thus were both the daughters of Lot with child with their father. And the firstborn bare a son, and called his name Moab. And the same is the father of the Moabites, right? So the first mention of Moab is actually during the time of Lot, because Lot's son is a product of an incestuous relationship between Lot and his own daughter, right? And that's the word. And these the Moabites are the ones that do not help the Hebrews as they came out of Egypt. And because of that, in 10 generations, they cannot come and join with the Hebrews. Okay. Why 10 generations? It means that at one point, after the 10th generation, they can come. Okay, my question to you, when was it that the Moabite joined with the Hebrews? When?
Joshua.
With Joshua. When Joshua, it was Rahab the Canaanite, right? Rahab the Canaanite. It was Rahab the Canaanite was not specifically a Moabite, right? When was it that Rahab was a Canaanite of Jericho, right? When did one of the Hebrews marry a Moabite, and then the Moabite became part of the Jewish nation, part of the Jewish, genealogy? Ruth, right? Ruth was a Moabite. Okay, right, let's go here. Remember, Moab was actually the son of Lot, right? Moab was the son of Lot. And Lot was the contemporary of Abraham, right? This is Abraham. Abraham and Lot is right here. Who did Ruth marry? Who did Ruth marry? Boaz, right here. Boaz, right? So Abraham and Lot is at this generation right here. So Moab would probably be considered the contemporary of Isaac, right? Because Isaac was the son of Abraham when Abraham was how old? Really old. He was almost 100 years old before he had Isaac. So probably Moab was at the contemporary of Isaac. So now you count 10 generations. And then the Jews counted inclusively. 10, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wow. From Isaac, right? It's inclusive. Isaac, Jacob, Judah, Phares. 10 generations, it come to who? Boaz. So now the Moabites can join in the 10th generation. Wow. Yeah, when I found this, I go, this cannot be what? It had to be true. There has to be an explanation. You know? There's a reason. There's a reason, right? Ruth the Moabite. And eventually Ruth the Moabite, what did she do? She contributed DNA to who? Jesus. Amazing, right? Right. After 10 generations. Okay. Yeah. And if you read Deuteronomy, you continue Deuteronomy 23 verse 7 and 8. Thou shalt not abhor an Edomite. Okay. Do not make enemies with the Edomites, for he is thy brother. Okay. How is an Edomite the brother of the children of Jacob? Because Edom is actually who? Esau, right? Esau is your brother. Do not be enemies with them, right? Edom is your brother. Thou shalt not abhor an Egyptian, because thou wast a stranger in his land. Okay? Do not make enemies with the Egyptians, because they saved you during a time of famine. Alright? They're saved. And the children that are begotten of them shall enter into the congregation of the Lord in the 3rd generation. Okay. This 3rd generation. Okay, I shouldn't have put this here. When was the first mention of Egypt in the Bible? And it so happens that is when God's people was saved during a time of famine. When was that? I have it here already. When is the first mention of Egypt in the Bible and God's people was saved during a time of famine, so then they went to Egypt during time of famine? Everybody will say, oh, it's Joseph, right? But that's not true. Genesis 12, and Abram took Sarah his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran, and they went forth to go into the land of Canaan. So when Abraham, by faith, went out of Ur of Chaldees, he went to Haran. And from Haran, he went to Canaan. But what happened in Canaan when he arrived in Canaan? There was a famine. And he went into Canaan. And Abraham journeyed. We go to verse 9. And Abraham journeyed, going on still towards the south, because there was a famine. He had to go more towards the south. And there was a famine in that land, because there was famine in Canaan. And Abraham went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was grievous in the land. Right? So the first time that God had to preserve his people in Egypt because of a famine was when? The time of Abraham. Right? The time of Abraham. Remember, do not abhor the Egyptian, right? Because he kept your father Abraham during the time of famine, right? And nourished your father in. And remember that story? When he went to Egypt, what did he do? He went with Sarah. And what did the Pharaoh say? "Ooh, you have a lovely sister." And he says, "No, this is, yeah, you have a lovely woman with you." And he says, "Oh, this is my sister. It's not mine." Right? Remember that story? Yeah, and he lied. And he lied to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh found out about it, The Pharaoh almost wanted to marry Sarah because Sarah was beautiful. And then he was rebuked, right? And then Abraham and Sarah went back. Okay? And when Abraham and Sarah went back, and they did not have children. And then what happened? Sarah had taken an Egyptian as a handmaid, and Abraham had Ishmael from the Egyptian handmaid, right? And what had to be done with the Egyptian handmaid? Had to be forced out of their camp, right? So the Egyptian, although the Egyptians should not be abhorred because they had nourished Abraham, the Egyptian also had to be forced out of the camp. The Egyptians cannot be part of their family anymore because now Hagar and Ishmael is banished to the desert, right? Remember, the Egyptian will enter into the congregation of the Lord in the third generation. My question is, when did this happen? When did an Egyptian marry into the children of descendants of Abraham? Joseph's wife. Joseph's wife. There you go. Right? And Pharaoh called, I have it right here. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph married the daughter of the priest in Egypt. All right? Okay. So we go back to the lineage here, right? Abraham was nourished by the Egyptians, but then during the time of Isaac is when the Egyptian bondwoman had to be forced out, right? Cannot be part of the family. Now you count 3 generations. Isaac, Jacob, Judah, right? Judah is the brother of Joseph. So this is the generation of Joseph. 3 generations. Isaac, Jacob, Judah. And the 3rd generation of Joseph is when Joseph married an Egyptian, right? Now, it was difficult for me to figure out. I cannot find Edomite in the 3rd generation. I have not. If anybody can actually figure out when the 3rd generation of Edomite can join, right? And the 10th generation of the Ammonite, that would be good. But so far, this is the 2 that I found, all right? that the Moabite can join after the 10th generation, and the Egyptian, this is the 10th generation, and the Egyptian joins in the 3rd generation. So you have an Egyptian, you have an Ammonite, and you have a Moabite, right? And an Edomite, and an Egyptian. Does that remind you of another story another prophecy in the Bible? The Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, and the Egyptians. Does that remind you of a prophecy in the Bible? Daniel 11, verse 41 to 43. And he shall enter into the glorious land. Who's he? Who's he? Daniel 11, who's he? King of the north, right? And the king of the north shall enter also into the glorious land. And many countries are supplied, and many shall be overthrown. But there shall escape out of the king of the north's hand, even who? Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. And he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, right? But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. All right, we've studied this, right? Remember what this means? Okay, right? And the king of the north shall come in and conquer into the glorious land. What did we say is the glorious land when we studied Daniel 11, verse 41? It's no longer Palestine. It's no longer Jerusalem. It's no longer Israel, right? They have been divorced a long time ago. The glorious land is now United States. America. The king of the north will enter into America, right? And conquer America. And many will be overthrown. Why? Because he now makes a Sunday law. But there will those who will escape out of his control, even Edom and Moab. Edom and Moab are the uncircumcised countries, the uncircumcised people, the Nethinims, those who do not understand the Hebrew language, that still has to be taught things about the Hebrew economy, right? The Hebrew culture, the feast, the Sabbath, the history of the Jews. All these, they don't understand it, but they escape out of the hand of the king of the north, right? And he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, upon all the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, but Egypt will not escape. And all these countries that represent that Egypt does not escape is the countries of the United Nations will not escape. He will also make a Sunday law with the United Nations. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, over all the precious metal, over the economy. He will have power over the economy and over all the precious things. The precious things is like the commodities, right? The stock market, everything associated with the economies of Egypt, of the countries. And the Libyans, who are the Libyans? The Libyans are the poor countries. And the Ethiopians, the rich countries, right? Because the United Nations divides the geography of the world into 10 groups. Based on what? Based on the strength of their economy, right? And the Libyans, even the poor or the rich, they will also all follow the king of the north, right? So Edom, Moab will listen to the call of the loud cry. And the chief is the what? The chief is the best, is the first fruits of those who come out right, will escape, right, and join with who? The priests and the Levites, right, who will teach them the things that they have to learn, right? And this, the Edom, Moab, and the children of Ammon is not exclusive to Daniel. We see this in Isaiah 11, right? And in that day there shall be a root of Jesse, which shall stand for an ensign of the people. And it shall the Gentiles seek. The Gentiles will seek the ensign of the root of Jesse. And his rest shall be glorious. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time, right? He hath gathered his people the first time. What? He first gathered Judah, right? And now he's gonna gather again for the second time, recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, from the uncircumcised countries. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together. The ensign of the nation, somebody who's lifted up and becomes a light to all these people. Who is it that becomes an ensign for this? Those who are the dispersed of Judah and from the four corners of the earth. The envy also of Ephraim shall depart, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, and Judah shall not vex Ephraim. Judah and Ephraim will all gather together, right? The 144,000 will gather from all the 12 tribes will gather together, right? And they shall fly upon the shoulders of the Philistines towards the west, and they shall spoil them of the east together, and they shall lay their hand upon who? Upon Edom and Moab, and the children of Ammon shall obey them. Right? Edom, Moab, and Ammon shall obey them, because they will have to teach these uncircumcised countries about what they do not know yet. Right? Because Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon have escaped the hand of the king of the north. Right? And they're going to join with Judah. And the Lord shall utterly destroy the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and with his mighty hand and his mighty wind shall he shake his hand over the river, and shall smite it in 7 streams, and make men go over dry shod. All right. The Review and Herald. The Lord God hath gathered the outcasts of Israel. Now, Ellen White's commentary about all this. Right? Yet will I gather others to him, besides those that are gathered unto him. I will gather my people, and after that, for the second time, I will gather what? Those others, right? The others. Seek ye out of the book of the law and read. In that day there shall be a root out of Jesse, which will stand for an ensign. Now Ellen White is quoting Isaiah 11 to 10 to 12, right? You are going to be an ensign to the people. They're going to be gathered out of the land of the Gentiles, right? Those people who will be gathered unto Ephraim and Judah. They will become Ephraim and Judah that are gathered together. They're like the two sticks that are gathered together. The Nethinims will join the priests and the Levites, right? These words outline our work. This scripture is to be received by our people as a message for today. It's for today. The glad tidings of salvation are to be carried to those who have not heard them, right? Spiritually, these uncircumcised nations, Gentiles, will escape the king of the north and join with Judah, right? They will be like Judah will join to Ephraim. The priests and the Levites who will teach them the Sabbath, right? The feast of the trumpets, right? The first day of the 7th month. They have to teach them about the trumpets, because you know what? These people do not know about the trumpets, that they are now living in the dispensation of which trumpet? The 7th trumpet. And with the seventh trumpet is the third woe. They have to be taught about the seventh trumpet and the third woe. And they have to be taught about the Day of Atonement. That they are now living in the closing scenes of the Day of Atonement. And that Jesus, Michael, is about to stand up. And then they have to be taught about the Feast of Tabernacles. That they have to make booths and run to the wilderness and live in tents made out of leaves during the time of Jacob's trouble. And they have to be taught about the history of God's people from the time of Abraham, right? Because what happened? The Feast of Tabernacles had not been observed for a long time, and now it's going to be observed, right? It's going to be observed. This feast is fulfilled, at this time. It had not been fulfilled in the past. The Day of Atonement is 1844, right? The Feast of the Trumpets, right? The trumpets was being sounded even at that time. Even in 1844, the seventh trumpet is being sounded, right? And then the feast at the Day of Atonement since 1844. Now is the time for the Feast of Tabernacles. And this had to all be taught to those who do not understand it, those who had lost sight of the history of the Hebrews, the feast, the Sabbath, and all these things have to be taught, right? And Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon will escape the hand of the king of the north. Right? So, that's where we'll end today. Yeah. Just studying the book of Nehemiah, we just understand that there's a lot of things that we can join together. I would say probably the one thing that we've added to what we've known before is 10 generations of the Moabites, right? And the third generation of the Egyptians when they actually joined with God's people. All right. Okay, and that is a more sure word of prophecy. All right.